I'm John Carr, and welcome to Matt Gamecast Episode 6, a podcast where we talk all about Matt games, culture, history, tech, interview people, and those kind of fun things. Today with me is Ted. How you doing, Ted?
Good, good.
Lovely. And Casper, how are you?
Good as always, thank you.
Up late for us, thank you very much. And the star of the show, it is Titus. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being here. If you wouldn't mind if you introducing yourself, basically, like what is it you do or what kind of games you make?
Yeah, I'm Titus McNally. I'm an indie developer with Rocket Adrift games.
Awesome. And when did Rocket Adrift form or get started?
Well, it started back in 2016. It was kind of two different companies. One that I was running myself and another one that Lindsay and Pat were running that I was a frequent kind of guest on. And so we just decided to merge the two companies.
Oh, that's cool.
It became a game company, though, I think in 2018.
Right. Nice.
Before that, we did animations and a podcast. We still do a podcast, but it was a very different podcast back then.
Okay, interesting. Casper was mentioning you do some sort of cyberpunk like D&D podcast. Is that right?
Yeah, we play a Cyberpunk 2020 and now Red, which is essentially like a D&D, but in a cyberpunk setting.
Very interesting. I know people play D&D all sorts of ways these days, though I've never heard of it in a podcast form. Is that something that's pre-recorded or kind of done live and saved? How does that work?
Well, people can do it a bunch of different ways. We do pre-recorded because we like to put a lot of production value into it. So we edit it, and Pat writes music for it.
Ooh.
So we try to make it a bit of a production, I suppose. But plenty of people are doing it on Twitch. It just isn't our modus operandi because we like to have some control over the quality.
Yeah, I'd actually be more interested, I think, in the audio version. I'll check it out. I really like Cyberpunk as a theme in general. Long ago, of course, I was really hyped for the game that came out, 8 months ago or something.
2077.
Yeah, 2077. I've never played the D&D, but the produced podcast actually sounds very compelling. I know, Ted, this is like a related tangent. You said, I think, you were doing a D&D campaign by email?
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, D&D started a lot of games and I wonder, does anybody here know who was like the first recorded person to sort of invent D&D or come up with it or anything
Gary
like that?
Gygax is
Yeah. Oh, it was Gygax, okay.
D&D.
Yeah, Gygax, yeah.
Okay. He formalized all the rules and everything like that. Okay.
I believe it was some kind of... Sorry, I believe it was some kind of strategy game called Chainmail before, and then he added some kind of rules for a fantasy setting, and that sort of kicked off D&D. That I think it's quite different from what we play these days, but that's sort of
a lot different.
The lineage, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, the lineage. I always like to know where things start, but I don't always. Sometimes I just idly wonder and I don't research, and that's what happened just now. But as far as computer or video games go, what does Rocket Adrift develop?
Well, we've developed 2 games so far. Our first game was a very short experience called Order a Pizza, a visual novel.
Nice.
That was about a divorced dad trying to order the perfect pizza for a very awkward dinner between his new girlfriend and his daughter. And then our latest effort was Raptor Boyfriend, which is a dating sim with cryptids and a raptor.
That all sounds very dramatic and compelling. Ted, I think you were wondering what cryptids were?
Yeah, just before I just started with this, I was actually reading the description on Steam of the game, and it talked about a community of cryptids, and I go, what the heck's a cryptid? So so go ahead. You tell me what you got.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I guess I sort of hadn't heard the word for a while, and then all of a sudden it seemed to be everywhere for me. people, I guess, had a real enthusiasm for them. The Mothman and Loch Ness Monster, all sorts of things. I find it, I actually really am interested by these kind of creatures that we create in our minds and how they can be linked to certain places or certain ideas.
That is really interesting. Yeah, speaking of, how things get started, where are you drawing the sorts of inspirations or ideas to make your games from? Because they sound very, very interesting subject-wise to me.
It's really, so Rocket Adrift is a very collaborative group. So a lot of the times the idea or the writing is the result of three people kind of bouncing ideas off of each other. And in the case of Raptor Boyfriend, it was kind of a long-running bit of a joke that we had with each other. Like, what if there was a teen drama, but it had a literal dinosaur in it? And we would kind of bounce that idea, and it kind of just sort of existed in our own kind of mythology for a very long time. And then we initially wanted to sort of turn it into an animated project, but we were talking about making the move away from animation because we didn't feel that it was really welcomed that much in the YouTube world and spectrum, and it was very hard to keep something like that going. So we wanted to move towards game design because I was getting interested in it, and we are also looking for a way to sort of create, I guess, more of an impact, but also a product.
That's interesting. Yeah, especially when you mentioned the first game, I'm sorry, the name escapes me, the one about the working with the perfect pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a very interesting and to some people relatable situation. Even if it's not that exact specific circumstance, it's like I have to do this thing with these people that I either know or I'm trying to get to know, and it could be really awkward, and you want to do it right. Like, I think a lot of people could relate to that idea. And, you could switch around the roles to be different things. In this case, it's the divorced dad and daughter and the girlfriend. I looked at that page. I didn't download it yet. That's on Itch, right? Itch.io, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I didn't get to play that one yet, I'm afraid, but that's next on my list. I did play like 20 minutes of Raptor Boyfriend. I was I didn't know what to expect, I guess, but it exceeded my expectations. I'm not a visual novel expert or anything, but I do love to read. I think the only visual novel I've technically played through is The Miskatonic, which is a like Cthulhu horror sort of dark comedy. Which was originally intended to be more of a game, but they turned it into a visual novel. So you can technically control your character by walking around, but you don't actually do anything other than walk around and talk to people. So it's really a slightly glorified visual novel. There's no other gameplay. You just go and talk to people and click on things. It's not like an adventure game. But when you mentioned the animation and like YouTube series, thinking of Raptor Boyfriend, the way you frame things, I was very impressed. Like the transitions, the framing, the colors. The girl Stella is like having flashbacks basically, and I love that. Well, spoiler alert, she's talking to her doctor, which turns out to be this dressed up like panda bear or something. Not panda bear, like a teddy bear, like all officially dressed. I love that touch, but he doesn't reveal it for a little bit because of the way the camera angles work. So I was really drawn in by the camera angles, kind of the way the scenes transitioned, the fact they got to choose some dialogue options. I thought it was really cool,
Well, thank you. Yeah. It was very important to us to kind of give it, I guess, that kind of look, because we felt that a lot of visual novels have a real separation, I guess, between the characters and the background. And having made Raptor Boyfriend, I totally understand why people go for that, because doing it the other way is a lot of work and a lot of assets, to create those kind of things. But right. We had felt that it was important to the look and feel that we wanted to get. So
yeah, I think you definitely succeeded. There's a richness and depth to it I wasn't expecting. I was just like, wow, there's a lot of layers to the scene. There's a real sense of space with the characters. Not, I'm trying to critique other visual novels, but a lot of them can be a little just kind of flat or not very animated or whatever. And this one definitely, I think you definitely nailed it. So I'd say your work paid off in terms of the experience, the feel, in my opinion, anyway. Casper, did you get a chance to check any of the games out? What do you think?
Yeah, I've played a bunch of, I say a bunch. I've played about 2 hours and 40 minutes or something like that of Raptor Boyfriend, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I agree. I like the aesthetics of it. Pat's done a great job with the music for the game. The art style in general is great. And what I like is the way you have this weird world of cryptids. Let's use the word again, just to make it everywhere, Ted. And sort of humorous things going on. You know, you mentioned the teddy bear before, but you also have more serious topics like social anxiety and things like that playing a part in it. And the game isn't all silly and it's not all serious, but you have a nice little blend there. And the serious topics are also handled in a pretty nice way, I think, where it feels like the understanding of the mind space is there.
Well, thank you. It was really important to try to do that justice, you know, and so we tried to take a long time and to do a lot of sort of editing in the writing and get feedback on writing those sorts of things. And yeah, I think it's very difficult for you to make a game of anything that's even a short game like Raptor Boyfriend and try to maintain a tone of like comedy constantly, or even maybe drama constantly. I feel like in a sort of a story or narrative game, you have to kind of have those peaks and valleys and those different tones, because if someone's just sitting there telling you jokes for hours, it's gonna wear down on you. And same thing if they're trying to constantly, be dramatic. I think so. It was very important, even at the outset, that we were like, this game needs to have a lot of flavors to it for it to work.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's definitely critical. If anything's kind of unrelenting, whether it's comedy, drama, darkness, violence, sort of anything, it's just like you need some balance, to give the players some different experience. And when you come back to the other flavor, it's like, it's even more like kind of tasty kind of a thing, if you want to say it that way. So that's definitely cool. In terms of the subject matters, I also started noticing that the serious sort of comedic / serious thing going on. Casper was mentioning, you were just talking about, and also exploring this sort of mythology and the cryptids. Right away, there's this initial talk of going to this lake, and maybe there's a big lake monster, and it might have, and there's a ghost that shows up who's really entertaining, Ingrid, the ghost, who may or may not have been eaten by the lake monster, and it's just, it gets started like going very quickly in terms of like the story and the characters, and I really like that. So I'm already curious, like, well, is there a lake monster? Isn't there? Like, did it kill Ingrid? Like, I only played a little bit, and I'm already like curious to know more. So I think that's a sign of a good narrative, narrative hooks, basically.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. I was curious, because I didn't get a chance to go back and like try different choices. Is the game, are the dialogue choices sort of surface level? Are there real like huge decision making points, or is it more just kind of like individual flavor? Like, this is how I want to express Stella, in the moment.
There's a sort of a combination of all of those in the choices. There are some that are going to just sort of flavor the dialogue for the next couple of lines. There's others that are sort of callback ones that will, plant something in the game that will be called back later on. And then there's the sort of bigger choices that will ultimately determine the ending of the game.
Right. Because,
Yeah. So I think a lot of times I sort of like that approach, because I kind of grew up playing the Mass Effect series, and I know that there was I kind of looked at that as like, I enjoyed the first one where I got to sort of decide how I said hello to a person, even though I knew that wasn't going to matter later on. It kind of added to my role playing of the character of Commander Shepard.
Right.
And so we tried to take that approach, and also to give it more replay value, in that the next time you play through it, you would try to approach an interaction a little bit differently and see a different side of Stella and the other characters.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed that right away. You can introduce yourself. You can be cool or be funny or even lie or just be truthful and all this kind of stuff. And already right away, I was like, oh, well, these choices all seem interesting. I would actually like to see the outcome of more than one. And as you mentioned as well, that little bit of player agency and kind of the role playing also comes through. I think it's very hard, generally speaking, to write a character with fixed interactions and dialogue. And of course, a lot of big budget games do this, where you can't really control what you say. Your character's just a character and you're kind of acting them out. And you can't choose anything, not like Mass Effect. I don't know, just say BioShock. I love the story and narrative. Nonetheless, everything's more or less pre-scripted. So it's you need to be able to identify with the character somehow, or have to approve of their choices. Or, you have some choices in the game, for example, or if you take BioShock Infinite to continue the example, if you don't like the main NPC in the game, the game will totally fall flat for you. That has to you have to connect with her, and that has to be believable. So it's well, how do you do that for everyone who plays the game? That's kind of a tall order. So giving the player some agency goes a long way towards alleviating that, I think, in any kind of game. Even if it is only surface level, even if it's only how you say hello or whatever, even if it's basic, I think that helps a lot.
I think there's also an importance to the illusion, right? Because if you really do try and immerse yourself in the world of a game, it doesn't matter if something is mechanically surface level, if it feels important, right?
Right. Good point.
I was thinking a bit about writing for narratives that can go separate directions depending on player choice. Does writing a narrative that can split off like that not explode tremendously in combinatorics and things like that? And how do you sort of manage writing something like that?
Well, it does. To be honest, it really does explode. This project was much bigger than we anticipated, and it comes from those kind of exponentially having to write the character dialogues again and again and again. If you giving someone a certain amount of choice in episode 1, you can't cut back on that in episode 2. You have to continue with what you've delivered, and so it becomes kind of a tall order. And you have to we initially were very kind of ambitious in the way we wanted to handle it, and you end up sort of realizing that the kind of decisions that people made in other visual novels, they made for a reason, and it really comes down to getting the project in a reasonable amount of time, because especially when you're a small team. So it does become quite an ordeal, because you don't just have to write one satisfying ending, which in itself is hard enough. You have to deliver one for every character that you've set up, with certain choices paying off that have been throughout the game, and that was tremendously taxing. There's no way of getting around that. I have a lot of I started off this project with feeling like we could make a better visual novel than anyone ever had, and I ended it with a lot of respect for visual novels that maybe I didn't have before, because it's very difficult, to do something like that. And it took a lot out of us and me personally, just going through the writing process and figuring out how we were going to code all of those decisions in order to make them meaningful. So, I have it does kind of explode on you. And if you don't kind of sometimes give yourself some ways of taking shortcuts, then it can get completely out of hand.
So did you have to later on in the project go back to prior parts and cut them down a bit so that later parts that maybe weren't as expanded wouldn't feel less expansive than prior sections? Or
to be honest, I guess the way that this game really moved was in an expanding direction. because we realized that we didn't have enough kind of character drama to sustain a game, and that the game had to be a certain amount in order to sort of pay off the promise that we made of its premise. And so we had to add in more characters, and we had to add in conflicts, because the first couple drafts of it, it was really kind of spinning its wheels and covering the same ground. And we found characters kind of just repeating, like, oh, this is my arc, and I have to stay here in the middle until you get to a certain point of the game, and then it's going to resolve itself. And so we realized that it was a game without a middle. You know, we had set up the kind of characters in an interesting way, and we knew where we wanted to get to. But you can't just hang around in limbo, right? The story has to be moving forward as the game goes. And in that way, we ended up having to expand it greatly in order to sustain the type of game we were making.
That's very interesting. Would you be able to share how long it took you to make the game?
Yeah, it was, I think, just under 3 years that we were working on this.
Wow.
And we actually made Order a Pizza in between that time. We a game jam had come up, and we decided to try to get some experience under our belt, because we felt like, because when we started this, we had no experience as a game company.
Right.
And by the time we finished it, we had to learn as we go. And I think a lot of that time, at least at the beginning, was prototyping and trying to nail down what type of game it was going to be, before we just kind of realized we should settle on a dating sim because that makes sense, you know. But when we were early on in the process, we were, exploring the amounts of point and click areas that we have. We ended up cutting that down to one central hub in between certain chapters in the story, because we could make that meaningful. But initial prototypes of the game had every scene you could click around, but we found, and I'm not to criticize that Cthulhu game, I'm sure it's great, but we found that the only purpose of that was to kind of move the story forward. So it ended up being this kind of stopgap where it's like, okay, now click the next thing to get the next story. And at least for the game we were trying to make, and the feel we were trying to go to, that start and stop nature was just not helping you get immersed into the game or the story.
No, I would agree with that. The Cthulhu game, I did a review of it. I even forget what I reviewed. Actually, I pulled it up. What did I review it? I gave it a 3 out of 5. So, not bad. But the start and stop nature you just mentioned, like, it didn't actually add anything. I felt like it was a leftover component of the game they intended to make, because it was supposed to be like some sort of, you're supposed to be the security guard at a Cthulhu lab or something weird, and someone's always getting eaten by a tentacle or whatever. But there's no actual gameplay around that. You never go on patrol. You never deal with any monsters. You literally just walk from room to room, and there's no exploring. There's no puzzle. Literally, all you do is go and talk to people. So it's really visual novel, but with some moving around in between. There's some nice art and everything, but it doesn't really add. I guess you can go and click back on a few characters and talk a little more. I guess maybe that's the only kind of purpose there. But I prefer the more immersive style you went for personally, because there's not this I'm suddenly out of the experience now, and now I gotta poke around and do something random, or like you said, you're really just clicking to advance the story. So it wasn't meaningful. I did critique that in my review of the game, so I'm very happy to you went for the more immersive style. You were talking about initial pre-production, basically, of your game, and it seems even very large studios go through this too. I was just listening to a retrospective on Dead Space the other day, horror game. Ooh. And the director was saying they spent 5 or 6 months just figuring it, trying to figure out what kind of game they were going to make, and what it would really be, and what the work, quite a bit of time, or maybe even up to a year before they started okay, here's our game, now we're working on it. So even with a big team and all kinds of people and blah blah blah, it seems like it takes quite a while to come to this, what kind of game are we really making, or what are we capable of doing with our team or our resources? So I thought that was an interesting parallel to hear it both from you and just the other day from, a AAA studio as well. So maybe that's just game development.
I really do think so. I really do think it's probably the hardest thing to do, because if you know what type of game you're making, you can code it. You can make the art for it. You can make the music for it because there's a direction and you know when to stop. You know when you've got there. But if you don't have that pinned down, you can be building and building and building, but you're really just trying to find the game. You're hoping that adding more code will suddenly bring the game into existence, or you're hoping that the next iteration of the art is going to pin down what type of game it's going to be. So I think it is the hardest thing, and it can take a while. Or in the case of Order a Pizza, when we went into a game jam, we didn't have that time, and so we just had to hit the ground running and really pin it down. But I think that you have to, without knowing that, you can spin your wheels quite a bit. And I think a lot of games, when you hear about developers that don't finish their game, I'm not sure that they ever really knew what that game was. Right.
Yeah, no, it's unfortunate. And this happens also, whether, again, indie space, AAA space, you see it. You see games that are too ambitious, like Cyberpunk 2077. You see games that are just kind of incomplete. These aren't Mac games, but something like Anthem from BioWare. I guess you could say overambitious and incomplete are kind of two sides of the same coin, but in some cases you can tell games just, it lacks like a vision. In the case of, say, Anthem, it really feels like they took two completely different games and smashed them together. This like first-person hub talking sort of oddball thing with like the third-person open adventure, open world, semi-open world action adventure thing, and there's just no relation between them. But they tried to do it. It was just really awkward,
And absolutely, because I mean, the Anthem started before Andromeda did, so there was no way that they were planning on making this multiplayer experience when they started, quote unquote, Project Dylan, right? They had imagined that they were going to do what they were good at, which was make a new IP and give it the Mass Effect treatment, I think.
Right. No, it definitely feels that way, because when you're in the city in first person, it's all single player. There's no other players with you. Even if you're in a party, they're just in a little party tab somewhere. There's no one else there. It's just you and your experience and your choices, because you can't, So that's very interesting to me. I actually met the Anthem devs at PAX East in, I think, 2018. That was interesting. But, I really liked that game, and I'm really sad they didn't. I don't want to get too off on a tangent on Anthem, but I think this concept of development is very interesting. I was sad it got, like, the 2.0 project got canceled, but in terms of, like, the vision, same thing I remember hearing. Flying wasn't even in the game till way later, like years in, and that became the main mechanic, is flying around in your big, mech suit. And apparently that didn't even come from the game to, like, the team. It came from the CEO or something. They sat him down to play a demo, and he's like, "This should have flying in it. Give me flying." And they're like, "What?" And then suddenly, oh my God, this is so cool. So, I mean, not to say there can't be an organic process in game development. You may have also stumbled across things, in Raptor Boyfriend, like, "Oh, this is really cool, we'll add this in." But it seems odd that it basically speaks to this lack of vision. Suddenly, years later, you stumble across the main mechanic to your game. Like, that doesn't bode well. Like, and suddenly you're changing the whole game and all the mechanics around that and the balance and the enemies and the weapons. Or I guess in the case of Raptor Boyfriend, maybe you started out to make a totally different game, then suddenly you pivoted halfway through to make a dating sim or something, and be like, well, that sounds difficult. Yeah. I mean, with the added pressure, I think, of the AAA studios is that you have the CEOs at the top who are chasing trends, so they're like, we want that Fortnite money. Can you make? We know you're good at making these single player RPGs, but what we really need is a multiplayer looter. And I feel
for the people in that situation. And it's one of the, I think the great thing about being independent is you don't necessarily have to listen to that stuff.
Right. You can follow within your capabilities or your finances or your time or whatever, follow your passion and really spend the time to make the kind of game you want without somebody telling you. Yeah, that's definitely there, bigger studios, producers, investors, publisher gives you a deadline, you got to make it, or blah, 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 and all this nonsense. So glad you had the time, even though you said it was taxing. And you said you tried to set out to make like the best visual novel ever. I haven't completed it, but in terms of my first impressions, it's the best looking visual novel like experience I've seen. So I'm very impressed by the work you've done on it.
Well, thank you. I wouldn't say it's the best, but I'm proud of it, and like I said, it was a humbling experience. That I said that to speak to maybe my arrogance at the beginning of this project compared to
right
being humbled.
In terms of like when you started like once you knew the kind of game you were making, was there any other games you played or took inspiration from or tried to get ideas or anything like that?
For me, the one that really changed my mind about what was capable in a visual novel was Doki Doki Literature Club. It was horrifying. I wasn't expecting a psychological horror to be nested in a game like that, and it really affected me. And I realized kind of what that genre could do. And the other one that I really enjoyed was Valhalla, the cyberpunk bartending sim. And
yeah,
it was played way more straight, but I really enjoyed the kind of peace you could find in kind of like a work sim, in just making drinks for people and getting into conversations. And I realized that like if the characters are good and the setting is good, then it's not, you don't have to, the gameplay is not as important as the overall experience is.
Right. Yeah,
absolutely. It's sort of in that same vein. There's also Papers, Please, where you sort of do a somewhat monotonous task of just check the paperwork, but the story and the people you meet along the way really carry the game into something else, right?
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking of it as well. So one thing is like what other games and things might have inspired you along the way, but do you feel like the experience of other things like doing the Cyberpunk podcast or prior experiences in hobbies or whatever have influenced the development process, maybe the writing style or the artwork or something like that?
Yeah, I think on a one-to-one, what really influenced the kind of art style and the look of the game was that we had done animation before, and we felt that it was really important to have close-ups and medium shots and wide shots, and to establish the background and to have sort of comedic timing between the shot reverse shot type of interactions that we were having. So that's like a very kind of direct kind of influence on that. In terms of telling the story in the Cyberpunk podcast that we do, I think it's like I really like telling stories and creating quirky characters and having a setting that I've been doing that for so long that this is definitely I think kind of, whether it influenced it or not, it just kind of revealed that like, since I'm so interested in this, I need to find a way to do this more, to create characters and world and a setting,
Oh, that's fascinating. You definitely have a talent for it. Absolutely. In your games, like you mentioned the game, the game jam. I think that had a week time limit or something like that.
We had a month for that one.
Oh, a month. Okay. There's a different one that I think it's a week. I forget what it is. But I've seen those occasionally. Whatever those kind of game jams are, a week, a month, and what kind of games come out of it is always fascinating. But in terms of the characters, I want to latch onto that a little more as someone who I really like theme in a game, and I can be very particular about the games I play, but ultimately I'm also very into just a story, even if it's something I may not Like, I'm not huge on visual novels in general or dating sims in general, but I've poked around them occasionally. And what I'm interested in is, is there interesting characters here? Is there interesting drama here or momentum of some kind? Something compelling, to make me want to play the game or experience the story or the characters or their arcs and things like that. So you guys clearly have a talent for it. And I'd be like, I hope you're making a game right now or collaborating with some, like, I want more of your, I guess I should go and listen to your podcast and see what you've cooked up. I feel like you have this really interesting imagination. I don't know how big your team is. 3 people, I think you said?
Yeah, it's 3 people.
So it's like small but mighty, I'm very curious what, like, I'm just theorizing in my head, like, what you might make. I don't know. I'm just rambling, but I'm basically, I want to see more from you because I really like the kind of characters you've made, even though I've only experienced them a little bit. And like you were talking about the Valhalla game, I've only played it, a demo of it, but same thing, like the experience. So if you can add kind of like, my favorite games are ones that have like good gameplay and good experience, or good characters, like fun gameplay and a nice story. Like those are some of my favorites. I tend to play a lot of like bigger RPGs and stuff, Divinity Original Sin or the old Deus Ex game, and even the newer ones, like gameplay plus story really draws me in. But if I have to have just one, I'd probably rather have a story, because if it's just boring, repetitive gameplay with nothing meaningful to it, it's just like, well, that gets old really fast. But a good story can carry itself along and keep pulling you in with new beats, new characters, new arcs, or whatever. So, or payoffs and resolutions and things like that. So, yeah, I guess, can you say if you guys are working on a new game or even conceiving of one or anything like that?
Yes, we are. We're already working on a prototype for a new game that will, I think, probably be a little more linear in terms of the story, but will have more gameplay elements.
Cool. Awesome.
Nice. Yeah.
Fantastic.
It was kind of a necessity because Raptor Boyfriend wasn't the $1 million hit that was going to make us all retire. So we have to get back to the drawing board and try to sell something else now,
Sure. But right.
I also want to commend, because I know I'm the one on the podcast, I don't want to take all the credit. I think if there's any success in the writing, it really comes from a collaboration of 3 people who have been doing this for a long time and working together. If this was just me writing it on my own, I don't think that it would have been very good, because I don't have a lot of knowledge of the kind of teen drama tropes that my other team members really helped to bring it all together, and I also think that if there was sort of one person in charge of the writing, then there can be kind of these power dynamics where I think that in our collaboration, the strongest ideas are the ones that survive, rather than any particular person's being able to take control of that. And I think that's a nice kind of thing that you get from a company that's set up like that, rather than a bigger kind of production company.
So how did you split out the tasks that needed to be done? Was everything collaborative, or were there, like Pat doing the music or something like that? Was there things that were more one person's category and separated like that?
Yeah, I think that we all have like a strong suit that we bring to this. And Pat is background art and the music, and a lot of the sort of ability to do the writing and editing of the stuff. We all split the writing as evenly as possible, but they were able to be the kind of constant eye on the bigger issues of the story. Lindsay's one of the most talented sort of character designers that I've ever worked with, and she was able to take something like a Sasquatch and make it into a cute boy that someone would want to date. And I feel like I'm in awe of that ability, and I kind of watch the transforming of that character from early iterations to the final. And I think that these characters are extremely like charming just to look at. You immediately get like a lot out of them.
Yeah.
I think that my strong suit, if I have one, is that I in the early phases, I'm very good at learning what it's going to take to make a project like this, and to be able to work on prototypes, to learn a new game engine if we have to, and to be able to kind of give these really rough estimations of what the game is going to be, have to be overall, in terms of laying things out in a very rough state, to be like, here's how we can compose this shot to make it interesting, before someone else comes in and makes the art better. But yeah. And then I think we all add something of our personalities into the writing.
I had a question about the little bit more on the technical side of it. When I went to look for the demo and download it, my version of Steam tells me that my computer might not be able to run it because it's not signed off as a 64-bit application. Are you aware of that? I know it's not a problem. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it up, because it didn't have a problem playing it on my machine. But and this is on the Mac side, since Macs went 64-bit, so Steam put a little warning in there. Now I've seen it on other games before, and I don't, but this being a newer game, I kind of didn't expect that.
I mean, I think that's the build was created on PC, and then it was made distributable to the Linux and the Mac, and we did some testing on Macs. We all work on PC and Windows.
Right.
As for that, there's just been a tremendous amount of issues we found with the Mac builds in Steam. There seems to be a lot more hoops in terms of making achievements and and other things, like just small things that you wouldn't expect in terms of for some reason it's always the Mac build whenever there's a problem.
Okay, that's
interesting about the problem you had though, Ted, because so I bought the game before the demo came out, and Steam did not have the 64-bit version or 64-bit warning for that, so that's kind of funky.
Yeah,
I think the demo has it, but the game doesn't. The game runs fine. It actually is compatible. So I've seen that a lot, because on all these big like Steam indie demo showcase things that have been going on last year, I've gone and downloaded like 20, 30 demos in a day and tried to play through them all, and failing, of course, but playing a bunch of different things. And noticing the same thing, a bunch of things were flagged incorrectly. Some, in fact, were flagged correctly and they wouldn't open. But, or in a couple cases, I later went and bought the game and the game was fine. It had no 30, no warning. So I think but I've noticed it specifically on demos, is why I'm mentioning this. Something to do with the demo build, or it's a certain branch. And as far as like Mac and Steam and problems, that doesn't surprise me. Steam's notoriously kind of misbehaves on Mac anyway. A lot of people complain about it. I run the beta version personally. That's the only way it gets around some issues. So I don't, I'm not surprised that you've run into issues there. Sorry to hear that. That's annoying. I'm sure no developer wants extra headaches and extra work and more hoops to jump through, like you mentioned, and little things like achievements. That's just weird. But that's the end. That's the Mac life, unfortunately, in many cases. Unless, maybe you're a specialist, like, some of the people on our side, Feral Interactive or whatever, Aspire Media, or there's individuals who also specialize in Mac porting. But, But, I only played a little bit. I didn't see any bugs. So I think you've ironed them out. It's just the demo's flagged, but it works fine. So anyone listening can go ahead and freely download it. No worries there.
Yeah, and I'll have to look into why that would happen, because it shouldn't.
Purportedly it's a a 32-bit or 64-bit flag or toggle. That's as
Yeah,
far
that's
as I
what
know.
I was. I think it's just a toggle, and I think the game itself has to have it. That's what I've read some time ago, but I don't know that for certain because I don't develop it. Just when I switched over to the 64-bit, I kept running into that. I mean, I have a ton of older games that don't work on the Mac anymore because of that. So
yeah,
so they don't run at all now.
If it's truly 32-bit. Oh, so there's a lot of the Mac gaming is very complicated right now.
it's kind of
so we've gone through multiple transitions in a short period of time. So depending on your hardware and your software, you may or may not be able to run a game. If you've upgraded to a certain version of a certain OS of Mac OS X, Catalina or above, you can't run 32-bit applications anymore. They just refuse to launch. That's where the Steam warning pops up that Ted was talking about. But if you have an earlier version, you could still run them. So some people are still holding out and not upgrading. But then we have the hardware issue where if you have one of the newer Apple Silicon machines, some other things may or may not run because of the hardware thing and some things being emulated. So you have this double whammy of 32 to 64, then also to Apple Silicon, and which one you're at and where in this like timeline spectrum and like how many games you can play. And a bunch of old games, were nixed upgrading to the new hardware, but then in some cases you can't play new games unless you have the newer OS and newer hardware, so it's like you could be caught in the middle. Yes, so I also feel a bit for anyone developing some stuff for Mac right now. It's got to be a bit of a headache if you're trying to like straddle the different zones basically of hardware and software and whatever. It's a little ridiculous, honestly. So
the good news, though, you don't have to worry about it, Titus. I've checked that like Raptor Boyfriend runs fine on the newest OS of macOS. It's just a Steam flag that pops up.
Yeah, it's just a flag. I know because I was running the demo. I had no problems at all with it. So I just wanted to bring that up because I mean somebody'd see that and go, oh, I guess I can't run it. I'm not going to get it. But it's new and it shouldn't be that way. So I figured if I brought it up, someone, you would.
Pardon me.
Question for you on the when you do release the game, seeing as you're coming, you're developing it on PC platform. So the software essentially that you use to do the development lets you output a particular version to another something other than what you're using, and then you also got to find testers for all those platforms as well, correct?
Yeah, we did a lot of the testing that we could. We tried to get as many people that were on Mac to test as we could, basically, because we had one Mac machine that we could test on, essentially at the studio. It's the engine RenPy can build distributables for PC, Mac, and Linux, and I think I'm not sure where it runs natively, but it's sort of it seems to work very fine on all of those systems. So it was usually it was nice that we had something like that because we probably would have just made a PC game otherwise.
Right.
But
sorry.
The problems that we ran into were very much like Steam. We found out was just the handling of it, and trying to get the achievements was for some reason a lot more difficult for Macs and that sort of thing. Just little things like that. But with that engine, you can be pretty sure that if it runs on one system, it's going to be fine for most of them.
Nice.
That's real nice.
I was going to ask what engine you used to build the game. You said RenPy?
Yeah, RenPy. It's
not familiar with it.
It's a open source, which was amazing.
Nice.
Engine for specifically making visual novels, created by PyTom. I know him as because everything's Pi, and it's sort of like coded in Python, and then it has its own scripting language and its own screen language on top of that. So you can write in code in Python. You could write it in the RenPy language, or you can write it in the RenPy screen languages for creating your UIs.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Multiple possibilities.
Yeah, it's very good for making a visual novel. It's what it's really excels at, is just showing images and doing the text scroll and moving through it. So in order to do other things with it, like the animation and sort of image maps inside of point and click areas, was a little more complicated. I think one of the things that I'm moving to a new engine now, is that I really appreciate is having a visual editor rather than working directly in code for the whole thing. But it was an interesting experience to have to code everything like that.
Right. You got to start somewhere. Everyone does, you know. An open source, that sounds great. I'm sure a lot of people use that. I mean, visual novels it seems like a new one's out every day on Steam. I mean, it seems like a lot of them are just these silly adult ones, but I mean, people can play what they want. But
well, I'm sure they benefit from it being open source, because if that was a proprietary engine, they wouldn't be able to do their adult themed games on it. You know?
Right. That's true. That's true. Yeah. Going back a while, back to the topic of your inspirations, the Doki Doki Literature Club. I just want to highlight that really quick, because I think it's a very interesting game in that it's in basically like its first impressions. It appears to just be this like cutesy high school, you know, anime girl stuff. And then it takes some really serious but very like compelling and interesting turns. I don't want to like say too much more than that, just because people should play it. It's free. You can just go play it. Basically, don't just look at the screenshots and go, this game isn't for me. Like, if you want like a psychological story, like, go play that game. It's really, really interesting. And I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about themes in games. Like, and this is something I want to discuss more in future podcasts with Ted and Lily specifically, and like military stuff. Lily's our other co-host. She's not here today. She's in training in an undisclosed location. She said she'd have to kill us or something if she told us. But as far as like your themes go, you know, there's things like team drama and romance, or this like divorced dad thing. Like, these are very interesting things, and games tackle all kinds of things these days to varying degrees of success, whether it's social or political or you know, romantic or whatever. Some games, again, going back to BioShock, I happen to like these games. BioShock Infinite started talking about the idea of like racism and class disparity, but then just dropped those themes and went off to like time travel stuff. So I don't like, it's not like a huge problem, but it's like, oh, this is interesting. They're actually trying to tackle this. I wonder what this game has to say about it. And then they just drop it. And I'm like, but I wanted to know what you had, like, what were you going to say about this thing? And you didn't say it. Like, that's kind of annoying. So, like, in your mind, should there be more or less within reason, like no limits to the kind of themes a game should tackle? Is it all about how it's presented, or how like tasteful, or how, what do you call it? Appropriate? Like, in your mind, like, do you have any comments on that sort of thought process?
Well, I think the reason why a BioShock game will bring something up like that and then drop it is because it's very hard for a corporation to say anything about anything, almost.
Right,
you know?
right.
And so they want to give the appearance of being adult themed or interesting, but they can't follow through with that, because when you really sit down in a boardroom meeting with your lawyers, you find out that you actually can't say anything. You actually have nothing to say about this, right?
Right.
Good point.
And it's like Watch Dogs is the same kind of situation. Like, okay, privacy is being violated. There's class disparity, government control. But what do you have to say about that? Well, what can you say about that, right? When you're Ubisoft, like,
yeah.
Ultimately, like, it takes someone to have something to say in order to deliver on a theme like that, and I don't think that comes from a place of that kind of structure that you would get anything. So I think ultimately, I think that there should be a way of looking at it where almost anything's on the table if you're an indie developer, but I really think that, and excuse my language, that these big corporations should stay the fuck in their lane, because and make sort of the roller coaster rides, because they're just embarrassing themselves every time they kind of present these themes and then back away from it. Because people know. And then they have to go into these ridiculous interviews where they say, Call of Duty isn't political. I mean, come on. Really? You can't have a war game that's not political. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. No, I definitely feel that. And what you said, I think, is very key. Like, what do they have to say? Or they end up teasing it, dipping the player's toes maybe, and then like, whoops, they just drop it and we're off to the next set piece or whatever. Or it's very surface level in most cases. Every now and then, there's maybe not AAA, maybe more like AA games that dig into this. Spec Ops: The Line or something is actually like a very interesting game, older game. But it seems like rare that a bigger game comes along with something to say. And it tends to be the indie games or somewhere in that, right? Indie's a pretty big wide range these days. But still, I agree. Like, if you're just going to use, like, let's say Watch Dogs, for example, if you're basically going to use all these interesting / serious themes as set dressing for your action adventure game, like, is that really, like, should you really be doing that? Isn't that maybe trivializing the subject, of like, invasion of privacy and hacking or identity theft or class disparity? Like, if it's really just about this cool dude in a trench coat going around like hacking and shooting people, I mean, I don't know, maybe you should have framed it differently or had a different theme or something, if you're not gonna like have an impactful thing to say about those themes, whether it's siding with those themes or against those themes. One would like make a stand, make a choice, or have the player choose or whatever. But Watch Dogs doesn't do that. So
it's a funny case with Watch Dogs where it's like, oh, it's horrible. You have no privacy anymore. Please click I agree on this 200-page EULA that says that all your data belongs to us.
No, for sure. And I think they should really, take some pages from maybe Marvel, which I'm not a huge fan of, but they understand that their movies are theme rides, and I think that that's what you can get out. There's a place for AAA gaming, and that's to create these overblown spectacles. But I don't think that they succeed when they try to tackle serious issues, because it's hard to criticize the system when you kind of are the system, at the same time. So
right.
I think that that's what I mean by stay in their lane. It's like, the Spider-Man running around on the buildings, like only a AAA studio can deliver on something like that. But,
right.
An indie studio couldn't make a game like that. But, when you try to pretend that your game is going to say something serious, I think we're all waking up to the fact that they're just kind of trying to sound like they're just trying to get you in there but they really have to do the bait and switch, because at the end of the day, there is no thought to that. There's no critical thought to that. And they're not going to just admit like, oh yeah, no, we think corporations are good and we want to invade your privacy. Because then they would reveal how terrible they actually are, right?
Right. Or in the case of Call of Duty, it's like, come play our mature, ultra gritty, dark, super game, and it's like, it's just arcade shoot 'em up. It's really fun. I play a bunch of them, not all of them, but and I think even in some of them, the story is actually pretty good. But is it like an astounding commentary on politics or war or whatever? Not really. It's mostly just shoot 'em up and cutscenes and spectacle and more shoot 'em up and explosions. So yeah, I agree with that largely. Like that sentiment, majority, like kind of just be the bombastic, bigger game, have fun. I mean, still make a good story, make good characters, but don't like tease players with these kind of statements, or introduce these themes, then never do anything meaningful with them. I don't appreciate that as a player personally. Yeah, so I'd agree with that. Yeah, so that was interesting to pick your brain on that. We'll be discussing that sort of idea with different themes in later episodes. But I always like to hear what people think. It's a recent thought of mine, so I'm just starting to ask people what they think about it, and I really like your thought process on that. That was very illuminating. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah. If there's no other particular topic anyone wants to bring up, we could wrap it up officially here. Ted, anything from you, sir?
No, nope.
Senor Casper?
I think we're headed towards an appropriate time for
yeah, more or less. Mr. Titus, how about you? How about any shout outs or you can mention your games or your website or your social media or anything you wanna mention. You can drop it.
Okay, great. Shameless plugs. I love it.
Yes,
we're on most things at Rocket Adrift, just not Facebook. We don't use it, but pretty much any of the other social medias, you can find us there. rocketadrift.com is our website. Find our game Raptor Boyfriend on Steam or itch.io and order a pizza free game on itch. And there's a demo for Raptor Boyfriend that it says it won't work on your Mac, but it will. So give it a try.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, gents. Thank you, Titus, for coming on. I love that. There was a lot of great discussion. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. A big thank you to Kevin McLeod for the intro and outro music. Be sure to check out his library on the web. You can find more episodes of our show on our website, macgamecast.com, or in all major podcast directories. If you enjoy the show, please consider commenting, following, or sharing. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.